Hello and welcome to another one of my ranking videos. This week I'll be ranking one of my favourite bands ever, Depeche Mode. A little bit of background about how I got into Depeche Mode. I've been a fan now for nearly 20 years. It was around the time you brought out the Best Of Volume 1 compilation. I knew that I already liked a few of the songs over the years, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to buy this Best Of compilation, give it a go, and the more I listened to it, the more I started falling in love with all the songs on there, and I started buying their studio albums from there. I've just been a huge fan. I really enjoyed digging deep into their back catalogue, discovering all their albums, all their B-sides, the amazing back catalogue of remixes they have. Let's get things started. Now, this album that is coming last on my list, sadly, originally it wasn't last on my list, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, actually, yes, I think this album deserves to be last on my list, just because of how I personally feel about this album and what it reminds me of from experiences in my life. Number 15 on my list is Delta Machine. I remember when it came out, I actually genuinely enjoyed listening to this album. Like, the production just sounded huge to me, and yeah, I just remember really vibing with it. I listened to it a lot when it came out. I really love the songs Secret to the End, Should Be Higher, that's probably my favourite song on the album. Oh, actually, Alone is my favourite song on this album. I remember really liking the bonus tracks as well, like Always. I personally think Always should have been on the main album, but the reason why this has come last on my list is because I don't think there's many great moments on this album. It just doesn't sound enjoyable to listen to from start to finish, and one reason for that is just there's a few songs in the middle that really just bring the album to a grinding halt, like My Little Universe and Slow and The Child Inside. Those three songs, they just kind of ruin the album for me, because by the time it gets to that point, I'm like, this album has just really just come to a grinding halt, as I said earlier. And then it picks up again from Soft Touch, Raw Nerve, and it's enjoyable until the end of the album. But just because of that lull in the middle of the album, and those songs as well, like Slow and The Child Inside, I just find quite depressing to listen to. I don't get any enjoyment from them. And also, when this album first came out, I was living in London, and it was raining a lot, it was cold, it was grey, so overall it was pretty bleak weather, and now that's how I remember this album, is just basically being bleak. Next up, number 14 on my list has to be Exciter. This album, I just never bonded with this album at all. I've just never bonded with this album at all. Like, when I listen to it, I just don't get much enjoyment from this album. I'm usually bored by the time I get to track 4, which is When the Body Speaks, and even A Sweet's Condition, track 3. By the time I get past the first few songs, I am bored, and there's not really much on the album that sort of brings it back. Obviously, I enjoy Dream On, Shine is a nice song, Free Love, but I prefer the Flood mix, the single version of that, and I Feel Loved is probably the biggest bop on this album. Actually, the album closer, Goodnight Lovers, I'm a big fan of that song. It's a great way to close the album. But yeah, there's just songs on this album that, like Comatose, for example, I just don't really get much enjoyment from that. And also, I just don't think the sound really suited Depeche Mode, that sort of early 2000s minimal electronic vibe. Their sound is usually a lot bigger, their synths are heavier and louder, whereas this, I just think, sounds a bit boring, sadly. But yeah, I haven't bonded with this album. Whenever I have tried to come back to it and like it, I just can't get into it, and I hope that changes one day. But until then, number 13 on my list, Spirit. Now, this album came out in 2017. I recall when the lead single, Where's Revolution, when that came out, I didn't really hear a lead single, and I was a bit worried about the album because I just didn't really enjoy it. Obviously, over time, I came to like the song, but it's not a single that I could come back to. Yeah, this album seems to come last on a lot of fans' lists, but I do get some enjoyment out of it. But again, it's got that sort of bleak sound to it, which the lead single, Where's Revolution, that basically sums up the sound of the album. I love the opening track, Going Backwards. You Move is a great song. Cover Me, great. So much love. I even enjoy Poor Man. And I love Fail, actually. The album closer, Fail, I I've seen a lot of fans complain about that song, but I love it. It's very, yeah, it's just so dark, and just a perfect way to close an album. I went to the tour for this, actually, as you can see with my t-shirt. Overall, it's not an album I enjoy listening to from start to finish. I think, there's another like mid-album slump, which they did on Delta Machine, where it just gets a bit too slow for me and comes to a bit of a hole, and then it takes a while to pick up the pace again. It's not an album that I come back to and listen to very often, but I do remember listening to it a lot when it came out and enjoying it, but as time has gone by, I don't really come back to it. Number 12 on my list, Speak and Spell. Now, this is Depeche Mode's first album, released in 1981, and it sounds a lot different to the type of music that they went on to do. Obviously, they became a lot darker. This album's a lot happier and upbeat, and it's got that early 80s sort of, synth pop vibe. I enjoy listening to it. Obviously, the first time I heard it, I was like, I thought, oh, this is very different. It's not the Depeche Mode I know, but it's got Just Can't Get Enough in it, which is a song that I always knew throughout my whole life because it still gets played on the radio to this day. So I was very familiar with that song. This album doesn't sound like the rest of their back catalogue because Vince Clarke was a member and he produced and wrote a lot of this album. And when he left, when literally Just Can't Get Enough became a hit, he went on to do other things like Yazoo and to this day Erasure, who are one of my favourite bands as well. So yeah, I love Vince Clarke and what he brought to Depeche Mode in the beginning. And overall, this album I enjoy New Life, I enjoy Boys Say Go, No Disco, Photographic, Big Muff. Just can't get enough, obviously, because it's a classic, and I love that they still play it on the tour. They went down a treat on the Memento Mori tour, which I saw earlier this year, and Dreaming on Me. Overall, a very different sound for Depeche Mode, but if you're ever after an upbeat pick-me-up, then this is the album. Next up, number 11 on my list, A Broken Frame. Now, this album, when I first heard it, I didn't really enjoy it. I thought it was quite boring, and some of the melodies were a bit just boring overall. I didn't think there was many catchy songs on here, but as time has gone on and I've got to know this album, I have bonded with it quite a lot, and I do enjoy a lot of the songs in this album. I can listen to it from start to finish and enjoy it. Bit of story about this album: Vince Clarke had left Depeche Mode and Martin Gore had to step in as the sole songwriter, so immediately the songs were starting to sound a bit darker, but it still has that early synth pop sound of Depeche Mode, but just with a bit of a dark twist. You can hear that dark tone on the opening track Leave in Silence, which is a great song. I love Nothing to Fear. See You is my favourite song on this album. Obviously it's a classic single. You don't hear it very often, but when it does come on the radio, it's always a nice surprise, and I'm reminded just how much I love See You. I wish they would play it, actually. The crown jewel on this album has to be the sun and the rainfall. What a great way to close an album. It just starts off so atmospheric, it's so dreamy, those synthesizers, the vocal production. I think that's the standout on this album, actually. Sun and Rainfall. Number 10 on my list, Sounds of the Universe. This was my first proper Depeche Mode album era that I got to experience, from the first single to the album being released to the tour, since becoming a fan, obviously, and at the time I really enjoyed this whole era. To this day, I still love the lead single, Wrong. Other songs I love in this album are In Chains, although I do prefer the Alan Wilder remix on that remix album that they also released years later. But yes, the Alan Wilder remix of In Chains is the version that I go to when I want to hear that song, and it's almost also just a bit of a tease of what we could have had Alan Wilder still been a member of Depeche Mode, or if they just got him to produce the album. But yeah, at least it's nice that we got to hear a song done with Alan Wilder again. Also, I love on this album Fragile Tension, In Sympathy, Comeback, Perfect, Jezebel. I love Jezebel at the time. Don't really come back to it very often, but I just love the dark vibes about it. I think Crooked is a good song. The production sounds a bit thin. I don't think it's aged that well, but I still enjoy listening to this album when I put it on. One song I do not enjoy is Hold to Feed, and I'm kind of like still to this day surprised that they released that as a single, because I just don't enjoy that song. I don't enjoy the video either. But overall, I enjoy this album. It was the first tour as well that I got to see Depeche Mode. Next up, number 9 on my list is Construction Time Again. Now, this was actually the first album that I bought by Depeche Mode after buying the Best of Volume 1 compilation, because I just heard Everything Counts and I fell in love with that song so much I couldn't stop listening to it. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go to HMV and I'm going to buy Construction Time Again, so then I can hear the rest of the album and hope for similar songs, but on first listen, I didn't enjoy this album at all. I think the song that put me off mainly was Pipeline. I just thought it was such an odd song and didn't listen to the album for a long time. But when I did actually come back to it, and the more I listened to it, the more I realised actually this is a great album, and there's a lot of fantastic songs on this album, such as The Landscape is Changing. 2 Minute Warning is my second favourite song on this album. I just love it and I've never got bored of it. Also the closing track And Then, that is just such an outstanding song. Number 8 on my list is Some Great Reward. So this album is one of those that I didn't really care for quite a while, and I think it's mainly because I didn't listen to it that much, just because they have better albums. But the more I have listened to this album over the years, the more it's grown on me, and I realised I can listen to this album from start to finish and enjoy the whole experience. There's not one song on this album that I would skip, and there's actually quite a lot of great songs on here. Like, I love Something to Do, that's a great opening track. I just love how chaotic it is and industrial sounding. They were definitely getting heavier at this point. Lie to Me, great album track. That could have been a single, that one. People just never gets old for me. Just, yeah, it's a banger, that song, whenever it comes on. I just love it. Stories of Old, Master and Servant is a classic, obviously. I would actually love it if they started playing Master and Servant again live, because I think that would go down a treat. The album closer on here, Blasphemous Rumours, is a fantastic closing track. Such a dark piece of synth pop with such a dark message. This song is a bit of a confusing one because it starts off really moody and then the chorus kicks in and it's really happy and upbeat. But when you listen to the lyrics of the song, they're so dark. Like, you wouldn't think that those lyrics go with that upbeat music, but somehow it works, and they managed to create a fantastic track and a great way to close the album. I'd probably actually say that that's the best song on the album, actually, is Blasphemous Rumours. Number 7 on my list is Playing the Angel. Now, this album to me is loud, and I love how loud it sounds. It's basically the perfect album to follow up Exciter, because like I said earlier, Exciter to me just didn't really sound like Depeche Mode. It was far too minimal. The moment you hear those big loud synths at the beginning of A Pain that I'm used to, you know that Depeche Mode are back to business. And the rest of the album is similar sounding in terms of it just sounds so big and epic, and I just overall really enjoy this album. There's not really a song on here that I don't really care for, except for Macro. Like, a Macro is skippable to me. The chorus is alright, but with this I just find really weird, like odd sounding, so I don't enjoy Macro much, but everything else in this album is pretty great. Like, Suffer Well, one of my favourite Depeche Mode songs. I can still listen to that on repeat. It never gets boring for me. It's still on my gym playlist. Nothing's Impossible, great song. Damaged People, The Sinner in Me. Obviously the lead single Precious is beautiful and just melancholy, just beautiful. Lillian, another great song, and the closing track Darkest Star, for me a great return to form. I think it's one of their better later career albums. Number 6 on my list is the latest album, Memento Mori. Now, wow, what a great album this is. The opening track, My Cosmos Is Mine, is such a dark, moody piece of music. Like, you know that you're in for a dark experience with this album, and it sets a tone. The moment that those lovely synths start on Wagging Tongue, what an absolutely beautiful song that is. That's one of my favourite songs by Depeche Mode, is Wagging Tongue. Ghost Again, what a wonderful lead single. When I first heard Ghost Again, I just thought Depeche Mode are back. This album, from start to finish, it's just stellar. Some of my favourite songs are My Favourite Stranger, Caroline's Monkey. I love that song so much. I see a lot of fans don't like Caroline's Monkey, but I love it. Before We Drown, a great song. People Are Good, Always You, Never Let Me Go, and the closing track Speak to Me. What a perfect album this is from start to finish. There's not one track I don't enjoy, and this album is just great from start to finish. It's dark, it's heavenly, it's everything that I want from Depeche Mode in their late career. And also the tour was great. I saw that earlier this year. What a great performance. Dave Garn still sounds great live, so does Martin. Just an absolutely spectacular tour. I'm glad I got to witness that, and I do hope to see them tour again. Number 5 on my list is 1997's Ultra. Now, this album, it was between this album and Memento Mori, of which one came number 5, but I think the more I thought about it, this album deserves to be number 5, just because it just sounds like so classic to me, this album. I just know it so well, like inside out. Even though I love Memento Mori, I'm still bonding with it, so it hasn't reached that classic status title yet, like this album has for me. This was the first album without Alan Wilder, so Alan Wilder had left Depeche Mode at this point, and I think a lot of people and fans thought that Depeche Mode were done and over, but they actually managed to come back with a great album because, yeah, this album starts to finish. Home, It's No Good, Useless, Sisters of Night, Insight, what a great closing track Insight is, and it's one of those tracks that just gets better and better the more you hear it. I just think this is a wonderful album, and it just encapsulates that sound of 1997 just perfectly. Number 4 on my list is Music for the Masses. Now, this is one of those albums where the more I listened to it, the better it got, and it became apparent to me that Depeche Mode just had a running streak of fantastic albums. From Black Celebration onwards, they were just on the running streak. So yeah, Black Celebration, Music for the Masses, Violator, Songs of Faith Devotion, even Ultra as well. Like, what a great run of albums. And that's why this one's at number 4. This could easily be at the top of any band's like best albums list, but unfortunately we have other great albums that deserve to be at the top. This is an album I can listen to from start to finish. It just sounds like a classic Depeche Mode album to me. Never Let Me Down Again. I love that song, and it was really nice to hear it on The Last of Us at the end of episode 1. I was like, Depeche Mode. Things You Said, great song. Strange Love, Sacred, Behind the Wheel, I Want You Now, Nothing. Just a fantastic album. I just love that late 80s Depeche Mode sound. Number 3 on my list is Songs of Faith and Devotion. Now, this is an album I actually struggled with at first because it sounded so different to the Depeche Mode sound that I loved. Now, with this album, with being released in 1993, obviously, I feel as though they've tried to make it incorporate some of that grunge sound into their own sound, and big synth sounds from their previous albums was sort of gone and replaced with guitars and feedback and, just distortion, so yeah, it took me a while to get into this album, but the more I listened to it, the more I realised, actually it is fantastic from start to finish. The songs are beautiful, they're well written, and it's just such Alan Wilder just did a great job on producing this album, because I just think the production just sounds flawless. It's just a perfect album. The songs have just got so much detail in them. I love them. So I feel You obviously is a great opening track. Judas, I just love that song. It's just so atmospheric and just such a mood piece. And yeah, the way it builds towards the end with Martin's voice just layering at the top, just rising up. Yeah, I love Judas. Walking in My Shoes, what a great song. Nursing in You, perfect. In Your Room, don't get me started on that. Rush, and then Higher Love, another great album closer. Depeche Mode do great album closers, don't they? They just know how to fit that vibe of this is the last song on the album, and they just know how to go out with a bang. So when this album clicked with me, it became apparent that this is actually one of my favourite albums by them, and I just love listening to it from start to finish. Now, down to number 2 on my list, and this is probably a bit controversial, but for me, my number 2 is Violator. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously number 2 is a great position to be at. Yeah, this album is just perfection from start to finish. The production is great, it just sounds so clean and big, and yeah, it's one of those albums as well, like the more you listen to it, the better it gets, and it's aged so well. It just doesn't sound dated at all. The track list is flawless. World of My Eyes, Sweetest Perfection, Waiting for the Night, Enjoy the Silence is a classic. Obviously I remember hearing that on the radio a lot when I was a kid. Policy of Truth, it's one of my favourites. Blue Dress, Clean is another great album closer. Again, they're just great album closers, aren't they, Depeche Mode? But yeah, overall this is a great album. I would have loved to experience this album when it came out, and I would have loved to have gone to the tour, but unfortunately I was too young, which can only mean that number 1 on my Depeche Mode ranking list is Black Celebration. Now, the reason why I put this at number 1 is just because I just love this album so much. It was probably the first album by Depeche Mode I just truly bonded with, and I just listened to it all the time, over and over again, and the more I listened to it, the more the songs just became embedded in my head, and yeah, I just love the whole vibe. It just there's so much reverb on the album. I just love that sort of like big reverbed synth sound that they were going for. It sounds very claustrophobic. The opening track, Black Celebration, it's just fantastic. Fly on the Windscreen, another great song. A Question of Lust is beautiful. Probably my favourite Martin song. A Question of Time, Strips, both bangers, and just so epic sound as well. I love Here Is the House, Dressed in Black. Yeah, I love Dressed in Black, and Clothes and New Dress is a fun song. Yeah, I just love the production of his album, that sort of mid-80s synth sound with all that reverb. I just love everything about it. I still listen to his album a lot. It's probably my go-to Depeche Mode album. If I was to put a Depeche Mode album on without having to think much about it, I would just probably put Black Celebration on just because I love it so much and I know it inside out. So yeah, that's why this album is number 1 on my list. That brings us to the end of my Depeche Mode ranking video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments what is your favourite Depeche Mode album and your rankings, and even your favourite Depeche Mode songs. Until the next one, bye!